Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's been a year and a half, I think, since we gathered last time, and it was a very exciting time because I think the movie was just going to come out that night. And so we were all filled with eager anticipation to see the Zodiac film. And I certainly wasn't disappointed. I thought it was a really great film. Captured most of the key elements of the case. And I'd sort of hoped that by this gathering the case would have been solved and that we would all be here, you know, kind of celebrating that it was finally solved and resolved. But that doesn't seem to be the case either.
I'm sitting on Bob Vaughn's organ. Now let me explain. There's a character in the Zodiac movie called Bob Vaughn, and he was a real person. He was an organist in San Francisco. He played the organ. And this is one of his organs. He died some years ago, but he played at the Roxy. He also played at the Avenue, I think, and a bunch of other theaters. And he was an associate of a guy named Rick Marshall, who was a Zodiac suspect, and that's why Bob Vaughn became a character in books and so forth. I think the Yellow Book called him Mervyn Burnell or something like that. This was one of his organs that he used to play here, and I feel kind of strange sitting on it, but this is where I am. Thanks.
Okay. Well, speaking of last year's gathering, just out of curiosity, how many of you were here last year? Okay, looks like at least half the people. Let's just see, show of hands, how many are here for the first time this time? Oh yeah, a lot of people are first-timers here. And also, how many people have read the book that I co-authored with Michael Kelleher? Okay, maybe a third to half. Good. And how many have seen the video series that I put on YouTube?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay, good. It's hard to believe that it's been 6 years since Michael Kelleher and I did that book. And since there are a number of people here who haven't read the book, maybe I will go over that history just a little bit, because I don't have any solution to the case to present or any really hot new information, unfortunately. So travel with me, if you will, back to yesteryear, 2002, and I, at the time, am chairman of the psychology department at Sonoma State University, and I get an email from somebody that I don't know, that I've never heard of, saying, hey, I wonder if you'd be interested in analyzing some letters from a serial killer. Now, this is kind of out of the blue, but I'm generally up for pretty much anything. So I said, well, you know, send me some letters and I'll noodle around with them and send it back to you, and we'll see what happens. And then while I'm waiting to get the reply email, because I haven't met this person, it occurs to me, well, what if this guy is a serial killer and he just kind of wants to read, you know? So I was a little nervous. He sends me these letters. He said in an email, and by the way, we never met. I never met Michael Kelleher until my work on the book was done. So this was all done blind. In many ways it was done blind. And that was one of the blind ways, was that I had not met him in person and wasn't even speaking with him on the phone, as I recall. It was all being done through email. And so I got the first batch of letters and noodled around with them. I didn't have any idea really what he expected, but I just kind of free associated to the material and sent it back. And then I got an email from him that was very excited. Somehow he managed, being a writer, I guess he was good at communicating through email. I got this vision of him that he was so excited that he could hardly type at the keyboard. You know, he said, I'm really excited by what you've done, and I wonder if you would be, and he had told me initially he said, you're going to recognize this case. I'm not going to tell you who it is up front, but you're going to recognize it. And I'm sort of going, well, I don't think so. I don't follow that sort of thing. But of course, after a certain point, the letters start being signed the Zodiac. And so, of course, at that point, something kind of clicked in and, oh yeah, the Zodiac, I've heard of that. Actually, I was out of the state. I did an exchange at the University of New Hampshire, 1977 through 79. So I think it was out of the state for some of the key portion of that. And so it wasn't really very big on my radar screen when it was happening.
You would have been pretty young, too, I think, at the time. Well,
not all that young.
10, 15? Well, what?
No.
I'm just trying to get you to come back next year. So.
Well, if I'm still alive, being as old and doddering as I am, no, I was not 15. So I got this very excited letter back from Michael saying, I want, if you'd be willing to work with me on these letters, to continue to noodle around with them, I'd really like to, or I've already done a bunch of work on this book, but I actually would kind of rewrite it and organize it around your letters. So I said, okay, sure. If you're game, I'm game. And then somewhere in there, I then discovered that instead of this guy being a serial killer, I discovered that he and his wife, they had just written a book about female serial killers that was the subject of a 4-page review in the New Yorker. So when I saw that review in the New Yorker, I went, oh, this guy's for real, So at that point, it got to be pretty exciting. And he didn't have a publisher lined up, which kind of made me nervous. We're going to do all this work on this book, and you don't have a publisher? You haven't sent anything out? And he said, no, everything I write gets published. Don't worry about that. That's not going to be a problem. So I went, full steam ahead, and my part of the work really lasted, we worked pretty rapidly, and I think it unfolded over a period of about 3 months, and my part of the work was done. And the way that we set it up was he wanted me to be as blind as possible. So he withheld the forensic details of the case, kind of the events and so on that led up to each letter. Then after I analyzed the letter, then he would kind of fill me in on some of the background. And so in some of the cases, I said some really stupid things because I didn't know, so I had some off-the-wall speculation about some little detail that was in there. Well, this could be this, and this could be this, and this could be this. And in fact, it was a reference to something that was very factual that I was in the dark about. And fortunately, that didn't happen too many times, but it did happen 2 or 3 times where I was left feeling just a little bit embarrassed. I'd gone out on this free associative limb, and it was clearly inappropriate. So the rest is history. The book got published, and I would say it was very well received. For one thing, we didn't come out and name a suspect. I think the book would have been a lot better received if Graysmith had not had not come out with his second book just before ours got released, and I think it was called The Zodiac Revealed, in which he identifies, he said, and the whole world was prepared to believe the case that he presented. And so, the case is solved, and here's the solution. So you can imagine how that undercut the market for our book, which is just kind of too bad that happened.
Well, also, a lot of people really didn't like that book you mentioned earlier, and they didn't want to buy another one after that. It got horrible reviews.
Yeah. So our book seemed to be well reviewed, and certainly in this community, it's gotten good support. Well, that's 6 years ago. Now, I have to tell you, I lead a very diverse life and have lots of other interests besides this. And for me, it was a flash in the pan because, as I say, I was not a follower of serial killers, was not steeped in the literature on the psychology of all of that. But I was trained as a clinical psychologist, and it was inclined towards what might be called depth psychology. So that, I'm one of those psychologists who believes in the unconscious, and that a lot of what we do is driven by the unconscious and influenced by people like Freud and Jung, among others. And so I sort of drew upon that. And also, I've always been an avid reader of mysteries, of fiction, crime fiction. So that was probably in there somewhere as well. The interesting thing that's happened is that as time has gone on, I've been contacted by a number of people saying, I know who the Zodiac is. You have described him to a T. And what I realized, one of the things that's really fascinating about this case, and I guess about our book, is it's kind of a Rorschach test, that certainly the picture that emerges from the book in the way that Michael and I portray him is, I guess, a very accurate and somewhat generalized picture of a psychopath, of the psychopathic personality. And evidently there are enough of those folks out there in the world that most of us kind of know one. I sort of had the feeling as I was working on the book, I could understand this guy. I wanted to put myself in this guy's skin. That was my approach, was to say, okay, let me try, because I don't believe that any of us are so different from one another that we are qualitatively different. It's more sort of quantity, I think. In other words, I think that we all have anger and aggression and hostile impulses, and if things had gone a little differently in our lives, maybe any one of us could have been a killer. I don't know. But I think that the unconscious dynamics that are there are probably present at some level for all of us. So I was willing to proceed on that kind of an assumption and figure that, in some way I'm going to be able to identify with this guy and feel my way into his psyche. There were a couple of questions that came up for me in that process. One was, hey, I'm talking about this guy's mama. What if he's out there, and he decides to come after me? And so that did feel like a little bit of a risk, but it was one that, I took it. And then the other thing that seemed like a risk was, hey, if I really succeed in putting myself sort of psychically into this guy's skin, what's that going to do to my psyche? Am I going to suffer from nightmares? Am I going to end up getting traumatized by this experience? So I was a little bit nervous about that possibility. As it turned out, I think I had only one nightmare in connection with it. I don't remember it. But I do remember waking up with a start and a fright once. And other than that, it was okay. And as a matter of fact, as I continued to move through the letters, there was a way in which, if all the letters are authentic, and we don't know, there are people who say that some of those later letters, in fact, were forgeries and so on. But, I found some sympathy in a certain way. And it was not inconceivable to me that the Zodiac, whoever he was, might have sought out some mental health professional at some point along the way and maybe received a somewhat sympathetic ear. I don't know. But at any rate, because we did such a good job of depicting a psychopath, then periodically I hear from people who say, okay, I know who it is. It's my father, or it's my neighbor. And these people are impassioned. I remember one call from a young woman who felt certain that she had been hitchhiking in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that she had been picked up by him, and that the situation got a little dicey, but she wasn't attacked, and she kind of got away. So there was that story.
Some are impassioned and some are insane. Some of these people.
Well, I don't know. You know, I sort of treat them all evenly, and what I've gotten from them is a lot of gratitude that I was willing to hear them out, to take them seriously, to not dismiss them out of hand. But at the same time, I've had to tell them, look, I'm not empowered. You know, usually I say, have you gone to the police with this? Have you gone to the authorities? And have you spoken to Tom Voigt? Go to Zodiac.Killer.com.
That's how I know that some of them are insane. Is 'cause I had to.
Okay, well, the first person I'm going to introduce is Nancy Slover, and what I have here is early in the morning of July 5th, 1969, not long after the shooting, a young couple in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California, the Zodiac serial killer used a payphone to call the police and brag about what he'd just done. The person who answered the call at the police station was a woman named Nancy Slover. Their phone call changed Nancy's life forever. In late 1969, Nancy did one media interview about her experience, and then she faded into obscurity, all the while fearful that she might herself become a target of the Zodiac killer. In 2006, Nancy was located by Tom Voigt, the webmaster of ZodiacKiller.com. Since then, Nancy has been actively involved with the website and has even been featured on television shows such as Haunting Evidence on True TV. She's even played herself in the blockbuster film Zodiac, directed by the Bay Area's own David Fincher. Oh, I didn't realize that. Nancy's here today to speak about her unique perspective on the Zodiac mystery. Ladies and gentlemen, Nancy Slover. Where are you, Nancy?
Hi, everybody. I saw in the show of hands that a lot of you were not there the last time at the last meeting when I spoke. I had debated about whether going over, rehashing that or not. But anyway, I will. I'll start where I did then. And my opening line is usually, if I look a little lopsided to you, it's because I am. I have a movement disorder and I look to the left. So people on the right of me will have to get my attention if I don't see them. The night, actually, July 4th, 1969, at 12:40, I received a phone call from a male, and he started with, "I want to report a double murder." At that time, I tried to get the vital information that we needed because we didn't have computers. I had no idea who he was, where he was calling from, and those were the most important things that we needed to get. Every time I asked a question, he would just get a little louder to cover my voice. I finally figured out after he told me, well, the statement was, "I want to report a double murder. If you'll go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you'll find them in a brown car. I shot them with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year." Now, I don't know, it sounds really silly when I say it, but those of you that have seen the movie and whatnot realize that this guy was playing with me. He was intentionally doing what he was doing. And I had by that time shut up and just listened and wrote. But at the end of my report, I did put that his voice lowered, taunting, and before he hung up, it was, like I said, it sounds kind of corny. If, I wasn't here to tell you that it's actually the truth. It was for shock purposes. But his last words were like, goodbye. In those days, there was no 911. You called through the operator. So the operator, when she would connect the call, she would listen to the first part of the conversation. So when he said, I want to report a double murder, she heard that. And she started a trace on the call. But we were really kind of archaic. It took about a half hour. They traced it to the telephone booth where he called from. But they would not allow their operator to be questioned in any way, shape, or form, wouldn't release her name or anything. So there was one other person that heard that voice that night.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Thanks for coming back. Most of you, I guess, well, if you've been following this recently, you know about ZodiacKiller.com, but the website that I first found in 1996 was just called the Zodiac homepage. And it was an excellent website. I was thrilled when I found it because there was such a shortage of information about the case. And there isn't anymore, but there used to be. There used to be nothing online, or except for one website or two websites, and there was one book, I think, and that was it. No movies, or that horrible one from 1971. They even misspelled Zodiac on the title. That's a sign it's probably not too good. So the Zodiac homepage was created by Jackson Garland. He's since moved to China. But he came back today for the 40th anniversary, and he's like my hero because he was the first site I said I got to do one better than his. And he had a great site, so I want him to come up. Jackson, come on. I want to introduce him, and I want him to talk. Buddy, from China. We finally met for the first time. So. Did I say, do I have a comparable site?
Oh, it's exponentially better. It's impossible to measure how much better Tom's site is.
I'll give you your money. Here's Jackson.
Great, thanks, Tom. It's great, actually. Thanks. It's great being able to put some faces with names of people I've corresponded with, for over a decade. Tom and there's a few other people here who I've talked to, kind of online, off and on. So I was in university, and I was, like most people here, I assume, just fascinated with this case and a lot of aspects of it. And similar to Tom's story, I wanted to try and create a website. I'd never created one before. And I was introduced to this case, probably again, like most of us, through the Yellow Book. And that's where the majority of the information that I initially had up came from. My site was up from 1996 until about 1998, I believe, and it went down roughly about the same time that Tom's went up. So his was the successor and the superior site by far. But one of the things that I noticed, or that happened over the course of that 2 years that I kept the site up, was that I got lots and lots of correspondence from a whole variety of people. A lot of people whom wanted to give tips on the case or thought they knew who the killer was, and of course that's to be expected. A lot of people who were just like us, wanting to just find out more information about it, find out who did it, but who are also kind of sort of amazed by how much a story like this gripped so many people and gripped this area for so long. So it was, as I kept my sight up, the holes in the yellow book started to get wider and bigger and larger. And it was really great actually getting a lot of information, maybe from some of you here. I don't know if some of the people here, those who email me, I know, I remember some names, but hopefully maybe I can catch up with you later if you did email me at some point. Hey, so yeah, come find me later. I want to talk to you. Yeah, it's been great following Tom's site over the last decade, because when mine went down, I graduated university, I moved on, I started working and just wasn't able to maintain it. And there's no way I could have done it, any kind of justice, not like Tom was being able to do. So it's actually great that the timing worked out, that his went up right when mine went down. One interesting story that happened when I was running my site, there was a sort of Zodiac copycat murder in Japan, in Kobe, Japan. I don't know if anybody knows about this. And a couple of Japanese reporters, one in particular, emailed me and sent me information on the case, and he sent me the letter that this killer had left. For those who don't know about it, a young schoolboy had been murdered and decapitated, and there was a letter left which was very similar in a lot of aspects to the Zodiac case. And so I took a look at that, and he was asking me for some an opinion on it, and there were certainly lots of links there. But I also noticed a link to some horror films as well, and it seemed that this killer had been inspired by both Zodiac and also some films, in particular The Exorcist 3, which had a killer based also on Zodiac, the Gemini killer in that film, in that book. And so that was something that was it felt quite special to be a part of helping bring, solving a case and helping them put that together. So that I thought was, that's something that I remember quite a bit, and I know that Tom has probably had quite a few experiences like that. Unfortunately, we still haven't solved the main case that we're all here for, but it's been pretty amazing following it over the last 10 years, and I certainly look forward to staying online. Unfortunately, I live in China, and sometimes the policing of the internet over there prevents me from getting on the site as much as I'd like, but I will definitely be floating around there, and I look forward to getting to know all of you even more.
What are you doing in China?
I'm a teacher, actually. I teach at an international school there. So this has kind of been something that's been a personal interest. So it's not linked to what I do there, but I'm a high school teacher. Yeah. Great.
Teacher.
That's right. So, I just want to thank Tom in particular again for all the work that he's done on his side. Like I said, when mine was up, I started getting bits of information which suddenly made me say, whoa, there's a lot more to this than is out there in the public eye right now. And I tried to get some of that up. Most of my site was still pretty much what all of us knew. But there were more and more bits which came out, and now, of course, we've got, I don't know how many thousand pages you have on your website. 10,000, 6,000? There's a lot. There's a lot of pages of information out there. 5 digits. Okay, so having access to all of that information that just wasn't there back in the dark days, the infant days of the web, is great. So I think I want to give Tom another round of applause for that. So I don't think would be able to answer the questions that other people would, but certainly I'd love to meet all of you. I'll be on the bus later on as well. So, yeah. Cool. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the Zodiac webmasters are all really tall, I guess. David's going to take over.
Okay, so we're ready to move on to our next speaker, who is David Madsen. And if you've seen the movie Copycat, starring Holly Hunter and Sigourney Weaver, then you're familiar with his work. He's a writer and a true crime buff. So here's David Madsen.
I guess I'll do anything for a free bus trip. So I'm a writer, and I write novels and movies, and I wrote a movie, Copycat, a few years ago, which was about a man who's copying the most notorious serial killers in American history, and the women who catch him, which is, if you haven't seen it, it's set in San Francisco. And it's only set in San Francisco. I wrote the original script in San Francisco only because of the Zodiac. Not because of romantic foghorns or, I don't know, an homage to Bullet or Vertigo or anything like that, because it's the site of the scariest unsolved mystery I know. And I wanted that sense of kind of frightening unfinished business to permeate the movie. I wanted the movie's atmosphere to be about uncertainty. Zodiac was a motif. If the cops couldn't catch him, maybe they couldn't catch my fictional killer. So it kind of dramatically stacked the deck against my team of cops and psychiatrists, knowing they lived in the city that could never catch the Zodiac. I had a lot of scenes in my script in which my killer painstakingly duplicates the Stein murders, but for reasons that were told to me that were creative, I think they were financial, they were cut out of the movie. But they weren't cut out of me. And so when I found Tom's site, it was kind of like coming home again. And because he was never caught, I think Zodiac is kind of like the boogeyman who transcends generations. I mean, he could be that stranger sitting in the car across the street who may or may not be watching your house. He could be that mystery caller who leaves those unsettling silences on your voicemail. Every night I wondered, those could be his footsteps following me home at night. Retreating only when you are safely back inside and you throw the deadbolt. So, in many ways, I think, because I encountered that story when I was really young, over the years, the Zodiac has kind of personified all my fears about, what bizarre twists of evil men are capable of creating. Those fears are still with me today, and for those of you who take the bus ride tonight, I'm sure they will be with you. Yeah, they did keep the scene in which Holly Hunter gripes about, "They couldn't even catch the Zodiac."
Yeah. Thanks, David. And David's on the bus tonight. And before we go, there's something else. It's kind of a surprise. A lot of people, and nobody knows about this actually. Ricardo is mentioned in the brochure via the website mk-zodiac.com. Now, it's a work in progress. This is totally new information, and Ricardo is going to tell us about something special that's going to happen on the bus. Following this event, and you'll be able to watch it on the streaming media and follow along. It's going to be rather interesting. I built the website, and I don't even know what this is all about, so I'm going to find out tonight, I guess. Ricardo.
Because it's the 40th anniversary of the Zodiac mystery, I thought it would be appropriate to have some new information about the case. And the bus will be going to two locations in San Francisco that if you're in the audience and you're not on the bus, you can still go to. And these are the exhibits that will be related to the tour. First, we'll be going to 1228 Montgomery Street, which was the house of Melvin M. Belli. And the bus goes down Union Street to Montgomery, and then we'll have a short presentation there. And I will have some information about this envelope here that was sent to Melvin M. Belli. And then after that, we'll go to Washington and Cherry Street. And then I will have some information about the Halloween card and envelope. And then after that, the tour bus will go on to Vallejo and Blue Rock Springs. And then I will have some information about the My Name Is letter that is over there. And then after that, we'll go to Lake Herman Road for the 40th anniversary. and then I will talk about the ciphers.
We have Bill Baker, who's a retired homicide detective, longtime pursuer of the Zodiac, and now a hypnotherapist with a practice in nearby East Bay, Benicia. I believe he did some work with our other guest here, Leslie Harden-Harper. Did I get that right? Who is the code cracker's daughter, the only child of Don and Betty Harden, the couple who worked together to crack the three-part Zodiac cipher, which had baffled the CIA. FBI and military code experts. That was so amazing. You know, all these people had tried to crack this code, and I believe they were teachers, right? And over the breakfast table, they would just kind of put their minds to it. This case just was full of all these sort of little amazing quirks. That was one of them. They presented their cipher solution to the San Francisco Chronicle on Wednesday, August 6th of 1969, just 3 days after the Sunday edition printed the entire code. Don Harden currently resides in Arizona, and Betty is deceased. And Leslie is an adjunct faculty member of the California State University, University of Phoenix, and Heald College, teaching undergraduate liberal arts courses. Today, she's here to assist us in honoring her parents' accomplishment and contribution to the Zodiac case. Take it away, kids.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Tom, for making it possible to take some well-deserved time to say thank you to these two people who, with absolute temerity, tackled a very, very big project and dispatched it in less than 3 days. I find that amazing. I really am honored to be here to represent them. My father, as David mentioned, is still living, and I spoke with him a number of hours ago, and he unfortunately has suffered a loss of memory in the last few years and recently diagnosed with valley fever. But he chuckled and said, "I'm very pleased. You have all my support and my blessing. Go and tell them about the code." So very happy to be able to do that. Well, one thing I was thinking about in preparation for this is how to properly represent this incredible accomplishment. And the only thing I can think of to do is to just sort of tell the story from my perspective. And to assist me, I have brought along Mr. Graysmith's book because the interview that he did with my parents was done exceptionally well, and for really very few exceptions is actually fairly accurate. I do have a couple of things that I wanted to add to that and kind of use that as a jumping off point, if you will. At the time we're talking about, this is very early August 1969. I was a child of 14, not quite yet that weekend hippie, but certainly hovering in that range. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that my most pervasive memory of this entire experience is one of a very bowel-gripping fear. That's what I remember. I do remember the morning in question. This is August 3rd, when the code is published. My dad takes the newspaper, unfolds it, and I really remember that very clearly. It was at first something of novelty, and something that my dad loved puzzles, and he was intrigued with this. And it's just one of those interesting things to me that he thought he could. He prepared by pulling out paper and pencils and very methodically sat down to work at it as a project. Probably not too many hours later, my mother did join him and wanted to know what he was doing. Gray Smith in his book says that my father was not a trained cracker, and he was not. I do very, very well remember the book Fletcher Pratt's Secret and Urgent that sat on my dad's bookcase as long as I can remember. And I do remember my dad had the book open and was working away with it. My mother had never seen a code at all. I had no knowledge or interest. What compelled her was the psychology of the figure behind the codes. And I think, if I talk about my mother at all, I think I'll probably be echoing things that I've heard others say here today. Talk about profiling. Talk about the kind of person who writes such a thing and who commits such acts. And that was what was the compelling attraction for my mother. They sat down and they proceeded to work, and Gray Smith says in here that it's a matter of reference to know what letters are the most common in the English language. It's also a matter of reference to know pairs of letters, and it's also something that we call trigrams, which are groups of 3 letters that would be in a row. And those were the things that my father started with. He did at first really go after the fact that he wanted to see what the code was not. What kind of a code was he dealing with? And he did this in a very methodical way. It was his approach to many things. He often quoted Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's character, Sherlock Holmes, in saying that it is elementary. It is the process of elimination, and the process of elimination is a very sort of scientific method of going after those things, very obviously, which cannot be the solution, eliminating those, and then what you are left with, no matter how improbable that may seem, must be the truth. So that was his approach, and he was very logical and a very left-brained fellow, and that's the way that he deduced that the code was a substitution code. The problem, it quickly emerged that the code was not a straightforward substitution code, but in fact it was something that was a lot more complicated and convoluted and used multiple substitutions for each letter. This is where we get to talk about my mom and her approach. I've spoken with Tom and also with Bill at length about this. My mother dabbled in graphoanalysis, and she did teach a graphoanalysis course at the local community college. She was fascinated with his handwriting, and she also brought something else to the table that I'm convinced was psychic ability. Very often, my mother, when she would examine an example of handwriting, she would just very casually say, and this person has very nice red curly hair. And I never did figure out how that was in the handwriting. But that was part of the package. That was part of who she was. And Gray Smith, again, he called that intuition. I think he called it an intuitive ability that she had. And that's where they really became, in my eyes, the perfect code-breaking team, because my dad had the scientific approach and very logical practices, very sound practices, and my mother had some intuition bordering on psychic ability that led them in the direction that they needed to go. And her intuition was very strongly, and I remember her saying repeatedly, there is going to be the pronoun I, and that will be repeated. And she also very, very strongly felt that the word kill would be present. So that, coupled with the knowledge that they had about the double letters and the repetitions and so on, was an early breakthrough. Gray Smith at this point kind of doesn't quite get it right because of the sequencing and the timing and so on and so forth. This is a project that began on a Sunday morning, fairly early, went on into the afternoon, into the evening, and through the night. My father at some point recognized that he had to go to work the next morning, and when he went to bed. Not so my mother. My memory tells me, I can remember very vividly, that she did not sleep and ate very little until the code was actually cracked. So it was a very diligent and persistent, driven effort on her part, and I think that also kept my father working on it far longer than he might have on his own. The next morning he got up and went off to work. He was a school teacher. Came back home and was probably mildly surprised to find there was no dinner and nothing at all happening in the kitchen. Everything was still going on in the dining room, and it had to do with this mysterious code. So I imagine there was some discussion about the dinner, and then probably pretty soon after that he rejoined her, and they worked until, once again, he went off to bed. She worked through that Monday night, and so on. And I do recall being in my room, coming in and out of sleep, mostly nightmares and scary images, because the words that were floating down the hallway were frightening words. Kill, dangerous, animal. And I remember when there was a lot of discussion about some of the words. The words are misspelled, and some appear to be quite awkward spellings. And there was a lot of discussion, but once the message became clear, it was a very frightening message. And I think that was somewhere deep in the night, somewhere late in the night of Wednesday night. And I woke up, joined my parents, and the question at hand was, what do we do now? It was kind of one of those questions you never really think you have to answer, because this was something that started as sort of a lark and a challenge, and all of a sudden there's what looks like a message. And then the other thing is that when you haven't had a lot of sleep, things start to look either more sensible or less so, depending on your perspective. At any rate, they decided that they would do what the paper suggested. The paper had said, if you think you might have a solution, call this number. So they did, my father did, and that was one of many, many calls. And they actually were told to mail the solution off, and they didn't hear back for a bit. But once they did, and once the quote-unquote experts had ratified their solution, it got a whole lot more interesting. And that's the point at which my parents kind of divided in their aspect with this. My dad, it was decided, would be the front man. He would answer the press questions. He would deal with interviews. And my mother was absolutely adamant from the very beginning that I not be photographed and she not be photographed. And that was something that she never wavered on. What it meant, maybe, historically, is that the part of this that was a truly beautiful team effort became less important. And because my father was in front of the public eye more, it became more of a sort of seen as a solo kind of event. But I think they were really ideally suited together with their skill sets to do what they did. That also, that separation that started there kind of deepened, and as time went by, my father became weary of the press and of the interest and of all of this craziness associated with the case. And by the time the next code came around, he did look at it. He did spend some time with it. And then really, when he was done with it, he really was done with it. He didn't want to spend any more time on it. And my mother had pretty much the opposite reaction to that, she became increasingly obsessed with the code and something about this case. And worked on that code really up until the time of her death. There were some conversations that she and I had about whether or not she thought she had solved it, and I think Bill and I maybe we can talk about that together. She thought that she had solved part of it, and my dad's response to that was nonsense. It's not possible, it can't solve part of it. So they had a difference of opinion. They divorced in 1983, and my mother passed away in 2001.
I was contacted by Leslie, actually it was last year at the last task force meeting. And at that time she wondered, and I had given a presentation for those of you that weren't present, as far as the use of hypnosis in criminal investigations. And it was fairly well received, but anyway, I was pleased to see Leslie came up to me in the audience, and she said that, explained who she was and her relationship to the case, and asked if it was possible if hypnosis could help her with two things really. One was the fact that she had taken the code away from her mother because her mother was slowly but surely losing her mind over the code. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So she took it away and she proceeded to hide it. And she could not remember where she hid it within the parents' house. So she wondered if I could help her to be able to remember where the code was hidden. And secondarily, if I could help her remember what she had read and what she had heard regarding the well-known 340 code, the unsolved code, which I believe is right here. And because she did have exposure to that over many years, and she felt that she did possess enough information to be able to perhaps be of some help in being able to at least get to a partial solution to the code. So that's what she wanted help with. And I had no idea how it happened, but somebody dropped the ball, and we never did it. I had mentioned the fact that Leslie had contacted me last year, and at that time I was willing to use hypnosis on her. And if she was still willing, I'd still like to be able to do that. Tom contacted Leslie, and she agreed. We got together, in fact, just 6 days ago, it was last Sunday, was the one and only time we got together. But I'd like to think that information was gained, but more importantly, I think the door was opened because she is able, as a very good subject, to be able to regress to the particular time when she was with her folks. And her mother talked about it, showed her written materials. She was exposed to the partial solution. So we're going to work together in the weeks and months to come, and hopefully we'll be able to report back.
Thank you, Bill. And thanks for that experience. It was truly wonderful. I can tell that we immediately went back to August of 1969. And I stood at the dining room table and I looked down the length of it. My father was seated at the end with his papers in front of him. And my mother came in the room, and then she sat in the chair and he stood behind her. And I think it was the most beautiful experience, because what I saw and what really captured my attention for that moment was not the code spread out in front of them at all. It was the look of love on my father's face as he bent over her and put his arm around her. So it was really, truly wonderful to be able to go back in time and experience a moment. Better than Polaroid, it was great. So, thank you. Wow. What a treat. So, that was a wonderful blessing that I hadn't even really looked for out of this whole experience. It was just marvelous. And we went on from there to, because all of the memories that came flooding back with that experience really corroborated everything that I had consciously remembered and was fairly well documented about that whirlwind 3 days. Where Bill and I focused next, I believe I told you, Bill, that it was 1981, wintertime, and I was with my mother. She was the only one of the team working on the second code, the 340, and she had shown me some of her papers and her work, and we were looking at them and talking about those. And I very clearly did see the word knife. That is absolutely engraved in my mind. And that motion, it was something that I know my mother acted out many times for me, and it was very likely that she would have had a cigarette in her hand at any given moment. And that was very definitely a knife thrust that she was acting out. And that kind of brings me to the next point, which is back to the profiling and some of these other things. My mother felt very connected to the killer on a mental plane, I think. And I kidded with my husband on the way up today that there is some of the solution of the 3-part code. This was it's sequenced now, but what isn't maybe immediately obvious about it is that there, at the time that my parents took this on, there was no obvious sequencing. So you have 3 pieces of coded material, and you don't know what order they go in, and you don't know if sentences, phrases, words are severed at any point. So where they join and where they end and begin it adds to the puzzle. And I think that what we heard earlier, that some puzzles are simply made to obfuscate and are not meant to be solved. I think that's a very, very important point, and it has something to do with the fact that this code was not cracked until someone who had maybe that little extra ability came to it and looked at it, because I do think my mother channeled some of that stuff. I mean, she just knew it. It was intuitive. It was something that she knew. And one of the things she knew was where it began. And I remember that. So she had a connection to the mind of the killer, and she had a connection to his way of thinking and being. And it's a lot like what you said, David. We all have a commonality, and it's maybe shades of difference that we're talking about. And she was able to connect with him to such a degree that it did drive her mad. And I know that she absolutely, positively experienced terror. And every day that went by, I think it became worse. Unfortunately, someone else found it before I could find it.
You found the place where you hid it?
I know where it is. I know where I left it. And I went back to retrieve it. And it is my belief that I was beaten there by just maybe days or hours by someone, and I hate to think it was someone in this community, but I don't know. And I had later heard from a Swiss journalist that he spotted my mother's papers for sale on the internet somewhere. And I don't know where. Interesting. This case does have some interesting quirks. Yeah, and honestly, I don't tell that part of the story because I don't look good in it at all, because that's the part where I take the code and the workings, maybe the solution even, away from my mom, because she's becoming so scared and so paranoid that she's sleeping in the bathtub. Thank you, everybody.
Leslie, thanks for being here. Donald Harden's on the phone. What? It'd probably be better if you did. He know. Leslie, you talk to him. I don't know what to say. I would just say thanks, Don, for. Well, aren't you glad you didn't leave?
This is my father-in-law, the guy that's trying to.
Yeah, Don Harden. He's usually credited with solving the whole thing himself, but you've learned that's not true.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know what you'll have to say.
Okay.
Look at his oxygen.
Hey, Dad. I have a lot of people here who want to hear your voice, and someone special wants you to say hi, Tom.
Hi, Don. Thanks for everything you did.